A terrific Thursday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. The day has finally arrived. The 2022 NBA draft is finally here, and the Grizzlies are rumored to potentially be one of the teams looking to move around the draft board. But if they were to move, what targets stand out for the Grizzlies that have a lot in common with past Grizzlies picks? We're going to look at that in today's edition, the draft day edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
A wonderful Thursday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. A bit of a condensed draft day preview of the podcast. So many things going on. Hope you're excited and that you have a terrific Thursday. We certainly are here. Co-host Michael Cole will be back with me over the weekend to discuss all the great happenings when it comes to the Grizzlies draft and obviously getting ready for the 2022 free agency season as well. You can find myself at StatsSAC, DeMichael at DeMichaelC on Twitter, obviously the show at Locked On Grizz, and right here on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button below. Your Grizzlies every day. Of course, we want to remind you of the title sponsor for our show, Arcade One Up. Make sure to listen for later on in the show for a pretty special opportunity through Arcade One Up. So the Grizzlies are now not necessarily on the board, but the day has finally arrived where the Grizzlies are hopefully going to be one of the more active teams on the draft board once again when it comes to the 2022 NBA draft. I spoke earlier this week about some potential rumors that the Grizzlies could be looking to do. It seems as if what is starting to be one of the more consistent rumors, one of the more consistent themes from multiple reports is the Grizzlies looking to move up probably into the teens for a target or two that they might like potentially if they were to fall down the draft board, or someone that they really like that's projected to either be in the late lottery or just outside of the lottery. And one of the other things that we've heard is the Grizzlies potentially attaching a veteran or two to their draft pick. Not saying they're going to trade two veterans in the same pick, but they could trade a Steven Adams. They could trade a DeAnthony Melton. The point is that Memphis looks to be aggressive when it comes to its options. And so what exactly would the Grizzlies be targeting? Who in the 2022 draft possesses skill sets that are similar to what the Grizzlies have looked for in the past? If you go back to the 2019 and 2020 drafts, the outside of John Morant, the Grizzlies added Brandon Clark, John Conchar, Desmond Bane, Xavier Tillman, and Killian Tilly. Now, both Conchar and Tilly were undrafted free agents, but there was similarities between all five of those players. They were older prospects who had shown improvement and good production in college, but also had shown the ability to add value outside of just one skill set. And through adding those players, you look at John Morant himself, who has become a superstar in the NBA. You look at Desmond Bane, who has become one of the best three-point shooters in the league, and Brandon Clark, who's been one of the most efficient scorers in the league. The Grizzlies' criteria of what they looked at to be able to bring draft picks into the equation has been highly productive. Well, there's three boxes typically that I feel are checked by Memphis, at least that were consistent from their 2019-2020 drafts. Now, last year, the Grizzlies threw a bit of a curveball. They looked to go high risk, but also high upside with Santi Aldama and Zaire Williams. So these criteria are basically more for what the Grizzlies did in 2019 and 2020, but it could be what they do this season as well. The first thing that seems to really stand out, something that the Grizzlies really value, is efficient shot making. And I'm not just talking about the ability for a player to be able to make baskets, the ability to get his shot off, what have you. I'm talking about a player who not only can score in multiple ways, but also displays the ability to know when to take his shot, how to take his shot, when's the right time to take his shot. Good decision making when it comes to shooting. Now, a couple of statistics that indicate the ability to know when to take the best shots are true shooting percentage and effective field goal percentage. So I applied a bit of a criteria to college basketball this season. Now, one caveat I will say is that these prospects that I'm going to identify in the 2022 draft that may fit the Grizzlies' criteria in past picks, they're more focused on college because it's just easier to statistically track the production of a player in college. There are plenty of other options that make sense for the Grizzlies that played in the G League, played in Overtime Elite, what have you. So this is not necessarily saying the Grizzlies could not go with an option that was outside of college. It's just through the NCAA, through college basketball, it was easier to identify prospects that met the Grizzlies' past criteria when it comes to, statistical analysis. But looking at players last year who attempted at least 100 2-point shots, 100 3-point shots, shot 60% or better in terms of true shooting percentage, as well as 40% from three. So this is talking about players who had decent to high usage, showed that they can get their shot off at multiple levels, and not only showed good decision-making, but also were accurate from deep. There were 30 players in the NCAA last year who met that criteria, and there's 3 highly intriguing names that come from that could be reasonable targets for the Grizzlies. Their names are David Roddy out of Colorado State and 2 Duke University teammates, Wendell Moore Jr., who we know has been a popular mock draft pick for the Grizzlies, and also my personal favorite in the draft, the guy that I would love for Memphis to trade up for, A.J. Griffin, who was a freshman last season, one of the youngest players in the draft. And in just general sense, the positivity that comes from this finding, from talking about these players and their ability to make their shots at multiple levels, to show right decision-making when it comes to their shots, as well as shooting from distance, that's exactly what the Grizzlies need. We know that areas that the Grizzlies could improve in are effective field goal percentage, finding the best shot possible on as many possessions as possible, and shooting from distance. If you can get a prospect that can help out in many of those areas, you have found a good player. And for each of those players that I mentioned with their shooting ability, these are players that can make immediate impact. Even though A.J. Griffin, is still 18 years old, he could still make an immediate impact with his shooting prowess. So when it comes to the Grizzlies, a need for them is clearly shooting. And when it comes to their ability to find shooters who can also show good decision-making, as well as contribute to the Grizzlies finding the best shot possible as consistently as possible, Griffin, Moore, and Roddy stand out as potential targets for the Grizzlies. But the Grizzlies' focus has not always been on scoring. They also value contributions outside of scoring. Look at Steven Adams. I know he wasn't drafted by the Grizzlies, but look at Steven Adams last year. He comes to Memphis, not a high-usage player, not a high-scoring player, but his passing added a lot of value from the center position. John Konchar's rebounding for a guard added a lot of value. It came up big in regular season games. So what I'm really talking about is guards and forwards, for instance, who don't just score and pass, but they also rebound. Front court players who don't necessarily just rebound and block shots, they also can be facilitators. Well, a couple of names stand out for the Grizzlies to potentially target in these areas as well. For one, last year, among guards and forwards, only 12 NCAA players who were either among the guards and forwards that played NCAA basketball produced at least 150 rebounds and 150 assists last season. Among that group, Wendell Moore, Alondes Williams, and Jordan Hall are highly regarded players who could potentially see their name called on draft night. For instance, Wendell Moore, I know I've mentioned him twice now, he averaged nearly 2.2 assists per turnover committed, showing that not only his good decision-making applies to when he makes shots or takes shots, but also in the ability to know when to make the right pass. In general, Wendell Moore showed multiple ways last season where he had the ability to contribute to a consistent offense, something the Grizzlies definitely could use depth in. And then when it comes to the front court, the other thing that stands out is there were 12 players last year who played 1,000 or more minutes that had at least a 13% rebounding rate and a 13% assist rate. Some of the players in that group of 12, Paolo Banchero, who is you would love for the Grizzlies to get, but likely won't be on the draft board. But some interesting names. E.J. Liddell out of Ohio State, who's projected to go in the range of where the Grizzlies' 22nd pick is. Then also Jalen Williams from Arkansas, an intriguing second-round big as well. So you've got some names. Wendell Moore stands out for his efficient scoring, but also his decision-making when it comes to passing. And now you look at an E.J. Liddell. You look at an Alondes Williams. You look at a Jalen Williams as well. You're starting to see players at different points in the draft where they're projected to go that could be targets for Memphis, and these players fit the Grizzlies' criteria. But one of the biggest things that the Grizzlies look for when it comes to adding players, whether, it be them adding it through trade, signing, draft, what have you, they want players who can make a two-way impact. And that is something that stands out. And there's some pretty intriguing names that stand out from college basketball last season that could make sense for Memphis because of the defensive impact that they showed. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Before we do, I want to talk with you a bit about Arcade 1-Up. That's right. You've heard us talk about it over the past few weeks. Boom shakalaka. We have big news. The only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I am thrilled to tell our listeners that once again, you can play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire. And one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Complete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you connected more than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1 is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others at starting at just $399. Check this out. They are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/locked on. That's arcade1, that's arcade, the number one up.com/locked on. You've got till July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? Of course, we want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. And also want to thank you as well, because tonight is NBA draft night. We will have coverage for you when it comes to the Grizzlies picks. We'll be joining the Locked On Podcast main show when it comes to getting analysis on the draft prospects. Plus, once the draft is over, either myself or Michael, both of us, will try to see, because obviously there are so many things going on, but there will be a show after the NBA draft tonight when it comes to breaking down the 2022 NBA draft for the Memphis Grizzlies. So make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. So we've identified a few prospects, either through efficient shot making or through the ability to add value beyond scoring, that can make sense for Memphis. But one of the biggest themes that stands out when it comes to the Grizzlies adding players during the Zach Kleiman era is players who can add impact defensively, and especially in the form of defensive playmaking, causing steals, causing blocks, causing disruptions, what have you. We've seen DeAnthony Melton be added who could do that. Kyle Anderson, though he was added before, he still has shown the ability to do it during the Taylor Jenkins, Zach Kleiman era. But Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, all these players stand out as players who, yes, they add offensive value, but they definitely add defensive value. And we know the Grizzlies' preference for strong defense and having depth that could add strong defense as well. Well, last year in the NCAA, there were 45 players who had a 2.5% steal rate and 2.5% block rate or higher in over 750 minutes of play. Two players who instantly stand out. Two players who have been looked at as being, this is a Grizzlies type of prospect. Tari Eason and Jake LaRavia. Tari Eason from LSU and Jake LaRavia from Wake Forest. Those are two players who, because of their contributions across the board, because of their ability to make plays defensively and just be heady type players, these are two players who they've not necessarily been projected to Memphis that often, but they are players who, when you look at what some of the better draft minds out there, they're saying this is a Grizzlies type player. This is a player I can see the Grizzlies really targeting. But here's the big key of all of this. When you put it all together, and you put your circle around these draft prospects' names, when you look at their statistical numbers across the board, you start to see some commonalities as to why these players make sense for Memphis. Consider this. When it comes to Wendell Moore, Tari Eason, LaRavia, as well as popular draft target Dalen Terry, it seems both Wendell Moore and Dalen Terry have been connected to Memphis more often than any others, especially with that 22nd pick. And I know that Dalen Terry did not meet many of the thresholds that I mentioned in this episode, but he missed these thresholds just barely. But consider this. Among these four prospects, Wendell Moore Jr., Tari Eason, Jake LaRavia, and Dalen Terry. Among those 4 players, Dalen Terry had the lowest true shooting percentage at 58.4%. Everybody else was above 60% true shooting, which shows good shot making. Each of these players shot 36% or better from 3. Now, Wendell Moore had a bit more 3-point attempts than the others, but all 4 of these players have shown the ability to hit shots beyond the 3-point line. When it comes to passing, adding value outside of scoring, when it comes to passing, you've got Moore Jr., LaRavia, and Dalen Terry, who all had assist rates above 20%. And then when it comes to rebounding, Eason, as a wing, had a 15.2% rebounding rate, which is very good. But here's the most exciting part of all of this. The steal rates for each of these players. Wendell Moore at 2.4% steal rate. Tari Eason at a 4.5% steal rate. Jake LaRavia at 2.7%. And Dalen Terry at 2.2%. One of the things the Grizzlies highly value are players who can turn defense into offense. Players that can allow for Memphis to get out on the run and have opportunities to score before the defense is set. Each of these players have the capability to add value in that area. And then, of course, each of these players are also wings or guards who showed the ability to also block a few shots as well. So you've got players who have upside at times as defensive disruptors. You've got players who have shown some type of shooting upside, at least potential to work with when it comes to the Grizzlies and their ability that they've shown to improve the shooting of players in time. But you've also got players who make good decisions, either with their passing or with knowing when to make the right shot. So it's not just that these players can contribute on offense or defense. It's the fact that they can consistently contribute in positive ways, which we know the Grizzlies value. That's why they went after Desmond Bane. That's why they went after Xavier Tillman, Brandon Clark. They want players who the overwhelming majority of the time that they're on the court, they're making positive plays. They're not being liabilities in certain aspects of the game that take away from their strengths. They're adding positivity in many aspects of the games. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to guarantee that the Grizzlies are going to pick one of these players. I am saying, though, that I do very much think one or more of these players would make sense as a pick based off how the Grizzlies have picked in the past. Tari Eason, Wendell Moore, Dalen Terry, and Jake LaRavia. And I know that those may not be the most exciting names. Maybe the Grizzlies go with one of those picks, but then they also go with the high upside pick who has a very intriguing pedigree, just didn't have a productive season in college last year, such as a Patrick Baldwin, a Caleb Houston, a Max Christie, or a Jaden Harden. Maybe the Grizzlies mix it up a bit. One second-round prospect that mixes in high upside, but also show good production in many of the areas that the Grizzlies really want to see production as a defensive playmaker, as well as a good true shooting percentage and someone that can add value outside of scoring on offense. Memphis Grizzlies' Josh Minott. He could be a player that the Grizzlies could target in the second round that both fit the criteria that they valued in the past, but also is high upside. So at the end of the day, the Grizzlies have a statistical approach in place. They have, well, I won't necessarily say that. The Grizzlies seem to have an approach in place. They seem to have boxes they want their prospects to check. Prospects that have checked them in the past have been a reason why the Grizzlies have drafted so well over the past few years, and it seems as if there are a few prospects in this draft class that truly emerge as meeting that criteria as well. It'll be interesting to see if Memphis sticks to its normal plan. Maybe it changes it up and goes a pick with high upside like it did with Williams and Aldama last year, and then picks a bit of an older, more certain prospect that more fits its criteria. Maybe they mix it up this year. Of course, the Grizzlies could blow it all up and just decide to go after it and go get a player that maybe we haven't even talked about, like a Jalen Duren. And I know we mentioned A.J. Griffin, but him as well. It's going to be an exciting night, and we're going to have the coverage for you, the reaction show, later tonight after the 2022 NBA Draft. Also, make sure to check out the live Locked On Draft show, as myself or DeMichael will be in person giving our analysis of the Grizzlies draft picks, perhaps a bit earlier in the night than many expect. Until then, hope you have a great day. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked on Grizzlies podcast.